I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a host of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. Before we get started, you can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to Velocities in Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode sent to your device for your listening pleasure. Also, Velocities in Music doesn't want your money. We also don't want to introduce ads into this podcast quite yet. Right now, all we want is for you to share Velocities in Music with family or friends whom you think would benefit from joining in on the music discussion Tom and I try to create in each podcast episode. Tom.
Yeah.
It's December 2016.
Yeah.
And last month we released part 1, the 80s coverage of Metallica, our deep dive into the best, most prolific metal band of all time. I'm just going to say those like superlatives because they are to me anyways.
For sure. It seems like forever ago, though, that we recorded that one.
It does, but
it's been a while. I don't think we've ever split up a deep dive like this.
Well, I feel like I've been listening to Metallica for months now, nonstop, and my wife does too. My wife hates Metallica.
Oh, really?
And so I've been playing it, and I listen to music when I'm getting ready. I listen to music, and by when I say that, I mean I put it on my speaker in my bathroom and blare it so my entire house can hear. I'll play it for my son and my children because I want them growing up. Yeah. I'm going to raise them right. Like I want them to know what rock music is.
I got into Metallica when I was like 7.
Yeah. My son's almost 3. I figure if he isn't shredding by 7, then he's probably I'm failing as a parent.
There you go.
So I have high bars to meet there. So my wife is just thoroughly sick of. She's very excited. I told her that at the end of tonight, because we're gonna do 90s tonight, 90s Metallica, and 2000s 2010s Metallica tonight. 2 podcasts. And just a note on those. Our first Metallica deep dive section of the 4 albums that came out in the 1980s. That was a long one.
It was very long.
It was like an hour and a half long. It was one of our longer podcasts. And, guys, quite frankly, we realize that sometimes, our podcasts get a little bit long. Each episode can get a little bit long. And Tom and I have made, a pretty intentional move to let that happen when it makes sense for that to happen, because we don't want to cut off any what we feel is good content just for the sake of cutting it off. To be honest with you, we did that in one deep dive, Modest Mouse.
Yes.
And I felt like that wasn't one of our best.
No.
So I don't want to do that. So we're trying to split them up a bit. So what we'd like to do tonight is do 90s and then 2000s plus Metallica, 2 separate podcasts, and do those in about 45-minute chunks. We'll give it a shot. See how it goes.
We do. Yep.
We'll see how it goes. We're not, but I'm willing to let it go a little long if it needs to.
Yeah.
We left off in 1988.
Yes.
With And Justice for All.
Right.
Where are we now?
Well, the next year, I suppose, 1989, and going through 1990 and 1991.
1989. That's that year that Taylor Swift wrote about, right?
I guess. I was born that year.
That also
which to
happened
me
that
is a more important event in my life. It was my life, but anyway.
Yeah.
But Metallica, they toured for And Justice for All, as I think we mentioned near the end of our part 1 podcast. They were very frustrated with those tracks because they were very long, difficult to play live, or all over the place structurally. They wanted to do something a little bit different. So they're looking for how they're going to do their next album, and they're approached by Bob Rock, who had worked on Motley Crue, and so Bob Rock was kind of on Metallica's radar for that. But
is that his real name?
It actually is.
Really?
I mean, it's like Robert, but as far as
but his last name is Rock,
right?
Yeah. He was destined.
He was
to produce rock and roll albums.
I know, right? How could you not? So he approached Metallica and said, "Look, And of course, I'm paraphrasing. I wasn't there. As I said, I was like 2 years old. But from watching the classic albums documentary on the Black Album, which is really neat, he basically said, I feel like you guys haven't put out an album yet that captures your live sound, that captures the energy and just that grand nature of your live sound. and like I said, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, maybe embellishing a little bit, but that was his mindset. That's what he wanted to capture. So Metallica started working with him on the Black Album. Now, the Black Album was kind of a tumultuous time in the band because 3 of them were going through divorces during the making of this album. So they really they struggled on a personal level, but they also strived to take that and turn it into something good musically, which, is admirable. But I know that there was also a lot of tension while they were making it. They did not get along with Bob Rock at first.
No.
They kind of hazed him. They treated him like crap. It almost sounds similar in some ways to the way they treated Jason Newsted in the very early days.
I think that, in that time, these guys were douchebags. They really just didn't treat people who were legitimately trying to help them.
Yeah.
They didn't treat them well.
Right. By the end of the album, apparently they had all, become friends. They got through it. They made the record. But apparently it was not a very friendly time. But their studio approach with Bob Rock became very different. He wanted to bring that sense of space and atmosphere back into the mix, which of course And Justice for All was famously lacking. He wanted to just put more mics on the drums, have everyone do their pieces really damn well, and just slave over it with a perfectionist kind of attitude. And I gotta say, to the credit of the sound of this album, they did it. So as far as, what went into the making of the album, I'm sure there's a lot more to say. We'll gloss over the history to the degree that I just have, but let's actually dive into the music on this a bit.
So 1991, the album drops, and their big single from this record is also the first track on the album, Enter Sandman.
Yeah.
The most radio-friendly Metallica song ever made to date.
Yeah.
And probably still currently, you could make that argument.
Probably just about, yeah. Well, especially in hindsight, because it was a radio hit.
Yeah.
And this album, now we're getting to a little bit of the reception of it, but I think that the two kind of tie in. I mean, this album was huge. It's one of the highest selling albums of all time. I think it's gone like 16 times platinum or something.
Yeah.
Just something absurd like that. And it was an opportune time, and it's one of those, when you really look back on it, just the perfect timing for this album to come out, because what Metallica has done is they've taken their sprawling songs and they've condensed them into radio-friendly track lengths, which still, you look at the track lengths on this album,
they're not particularly short.
No, they still average around 5 minutes, which is long for a radio single. But think about what was happening in music in 1991. This is when grunge exploded.
Right.
You had Pearl Jam's 10, you had Nirvana's Nevermind, you had Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger, and then thrown in there you have Metallica's Black Album, which, isn't grunge really, but it still fits in with that kind of aesthetic and that kind of attitude.
Yeah, for a couple of reasons. I think in the approach on the songwriting, on Black Album, you hear slower tempos. They specifically throughout the album tried slowing down the pace of the songs, very, where you had a lot of that like thrash metal guitar in any of their first 4 records. I won't say it's not here. I think the closing track proves that wrong. But throughout the record, you don't hear that nearly as frequently. In fact, it's infrequent when you do hear that. So focus on slower tempos. Also, Lars, he focused on simpler drum parts.
Yeah.
You can just tell from, Enter Sandman and several of the tracks early on the album that he deliberately chose to make his drum parts more simple and easier to perform and follow.
Which he said he was influenced by the drummer from AC/DC, which I think that is the only time the drummer of AC/DC has ever inspired someone in a way that wasn't just, I want to be better than the guy from AC/DC. Because let's face it, he doesn't really do a whole lot.
Yeah, he actually said that he wanted to avoid the progressive Persian, like Neil Peart paradiddles, which have become boring to play live. Who is this guy?
Yeah.
How, like, in listening to the first 4 Metallica albums, especially what I heard on And Justice for All, how could that ever be considered boring? Like, this guy's sick. Like, there's something wrong with him. And then he switched to a really boring, simple, drum parts, and then all of a sudden that's more fun to play live. That doesn't really add up, but I can understand the sentiment, I guess, that he's coming from, having done that for literally a decade.
Right. I think what he was going for was a less is more approach from a quality versus quantity standpoint. Right. Instead of just working his ass off all the time, doing all the offbeats, doing all the double kicks, it's more just when I'm going to hit my drums, it's going to be huge.
Right.
And that way, every hit counts a little bit more, you know?
Yep.
And I think the production really helps to exaggerate that.
I agree with that. I also think that a lot of the fills that he does, when he does do fills or bigger, more expansive drum parts in any of these songs, they actually have more of an impact because of that. It's not this constant barrage. It's very, very well-crafted drum pieces. And I think that actually was pretty wise from the band as a whole and Lars as a drummer, because there's several other songwriting changes going on here. The guitars, I think, are focusing a lot more on simpler verse and chorus melodies, but then the solos are way more expansive, I would say. Like they cranked the solos up a notch, and in a way, I kind of feel like that Black Album has some more leanings towards classic rock.
Yeah,
because they're purposefully trying to set up Hammett's soloing to be something really special. It's almost showcased in a way,
right?
And I think that works better with Lars's drumming. Also, James Hetfield, I mean, his voice, I think this is the best vocal performance in all of their catalog. His vocals are just spot on. He's singing more. I think at some point he had been taking vocal lessons.
Yep, right around this time.
Right, and you can really tell. And they actually do a very nice job producing his vocals. They sound very clean. When he sings, it doesn't sound over the top or annoying. That's something that will change in subsequent Metallica records. And he's not doing that shrill, high-pitched scream that we heard in some of the earlier Metallica records, which I happen to like.
Yeah.
But this is more of a middle-of-the-road rock vocal approach, and it's very well executed.
It's a very good balance.
Right.
And what they do on this album as well, we talked about shortening the track lengths up. This is something that, because it ended up becoming radio friendly, a lot of their fans were really disappointed by. But here's what we got to realize. Metallica, it was in their nature to alienate their fans. They did it with every single album following Kill 'Em All. Ride the Lightning, people got pissed about the acoustic instruments, but for probably every fan that lost track of them, they gained more. And that I think happened album to album.
And to get a little bit like playing street corner psychologist here, I think Metallica fans kind of like it too. They kind of like that Metallica's like, I don't care.
Yeah, there's that alluring rock star mentality. It's
How are they going to abuse us this time? I'm going to sign a petition, get Bob Rock out of here.
I'm going to see. Oh yeah, and that actually happened. Yeah. We're getting there. I would liken it, Jake. I assume. Correct me if I'm wrong, since you're the sports guy. To being a fan of a team that has a really crappy run of however long. You still stick with them, you still want them to do well, but you can't help but hate them when they're not doing what you want them to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in this case, it's almost like they switched out head coaches.
Yeah.
And they had they produced, it's like the team came out, and then this is a really tired metaphor, but then they played a whole different style of game, but still were successful with it. And a lot of the fans just want them to go back to the old way of doing things.
Right.
And that's kind of unfortunate, because I think Black Album really makes a statement. I think that what Bob Rock's message to the band was, and what the band really needed, was a new identity. I mean, how many years has Cliff been dead at this point? And I don't feel like they were really over that in Injustice for All.
No,
not at all. And maybe that album was closing the books on Cliff, but this album is Metallica reborn. And with Newsted on vocals, I think this is, or Newsted on bass, this is really the like epitome of his presence in the band as Metallica in the 90s. It was all about the foundation that they built with Black Album.
You really feel them click together. And this album is more about songwriting. It's more about melody than anything they had put out. They wanted to challenge themselves, because they felt like, for all the brilliance that was albums like Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, they felt that they were almost trying to overcompensate by making these really expansive, complex tracks. They're like, you know what? we should be able to tighten this up and still make something impactful, because that's what good songwriters do. And I think they did a good job of that. Now, I will say, I'm going to be a little sacrilegious here. I'm going to offer some criticism to this album, because there's no sacred cows on this podcast. We gotta rip into everything. And while nothing will ever take away the iconic status that this album has, it's one that while I still love, whenever I come back to it, I'm a little bit mixed. I don't like it as much as I used to. And I think it's for a few key reasons. First off, the lyrics. While I actually like to see Hetfield getting a little more personal at times.
Yeah, there's certainly edging more personal in the lyrics.
Right, but I don't feel like it always matches. There's something about listening to their 80s stuff and listening to the stuff about nuclear warfare and execution
and
suicide and anger and drug addiction and governmental abuse of power. Like, those are really strong, heavy topics. And then on self-titled Metallica record, you've got Holier Than Thou, which is basically about judgmental people are bad. You've got of Wolf and Man, which is about werewolves. You've got My Friend of Misery, which it sounds to me like it's just about someone who complains a lot. Like they're not really very large universal topics. Now, I think that there are highlights still on here. For example, the two ballads, The Unforgiven and Nothing Else Matters, I think he makes the lyrics fit with the style of the sound. Also, The God That Failed is a pretty powerful song when you understand the background about it being, him dealing with his mother who died of cancer because she wouldn't get treatment for religious reasons. Like, that's that's the kind of personal side that I like to see him exploring, because it makes for powerful music.
If you're going to go personal, go that direction.
Right. But I don't. But there are some spots on here that I just don't really quite do it for me at that level. The other thing I've kind of struggled with, pun intended, is the last two tracks, My Friend of Misery and The Struggle Within. I can't get into these songs. And My Friend of Misery I want to like because it's got that really cool opening bass riff, that Jason Newsted bass riff. That was one of the first bass riffs I ever learned. I was like, I got to learn how to play My Friend of Misery. But where they go with the song just feels a little operatic and not very authentic to me. And especially considering it's actually the longest track on the album at 6 minutes and 50 seconds, I just don't feel like it does a lot. And then it ends with The Struggle Within, which is a little bit more up-tempo.
Yeah, I call this like a boilerplate Metallica album closer.
Yeah, it doesn't really end with a bang to me. Like, it ends with some good energy, but the song itself, the melody, the lyrics, the presentation of it doesn't do a lot for me. So
it almost feels like it doesn't even fit on this record even.
Right.
Like, it's just leftovers from their early years.
So I'm going to do something really arrogant here, Jake. This is the most pretentious thing I've probably ever done, because like I said, the success that this album achieved is monumental. The impact that it's had on music history is huge, but there is a way that they could have changed it that I would have liked it better. And here's what I would propose. Cut off My Friend of Misery and The Struggle Within. Just remove them from the track list. And move Nothing Else Matters to the end. Just think about it for a second. Here's my argument there. Nothing Else Matters, I think, would make an incredibly powerful closing track. And if you actually I listen to it like this, and if you listen to The God That Failed, ends with this like kind of clean guitar riff that transitions perfectly into Nothing Else Matters.
So what about Of Wolf and Man, though? If we're going to get nerdy here, which really, you're not being arrogant. You're being super nerd. You're being Metallica super nerd. And
fair enough.
I think that's pretty badass. So let's roll with this for a second.
All right.
Let's roll with this.
All right.
So one of my favorite things, Nothing Else Matters, is probably, I want to say, I don't want to call it my favorite track on the album, but it's up there. It's like one of my favorite tracks on this record. So great song. And I feel like, that song has has the acoustic. It's your typical Metallica ballad. You have the acoustic guitar start with some Bob rock. This is kind of a new invention. Some light string backings going in there, slowly building with the guitars escalating with each additional section that goes in. So you have this very melodic piece, right? And I think Hetfield does some of his best vocal performance in this song. Mm-hmm. Very convincing, very emotional. When that song ends, you start Of Wolf and Man, and man, while the lyrics might not be up to par with previous Metallica records, that is such a brutal beginning to that song, and it is the perfect transition away from the softness of Nothing Else Matters.
Yeah.
So what happens to that song in your new scenario?
It just goes through the never into Of Wolf and Man, and you're right. You lose a transition there that I think you're right is strong, but I think that Nothing Else Matters, the climax that it hits with that guitar solo, and then it comes back down and just fades out with that opening riff. I mean, just thinking about listening to this album for the first time and getting to that moment and ending there, it's like, whoa. Like, it's I think, more powerful than The Struggle Within.
Yeah, I think you bring up fair points. That would also bring the album down to probably around 50, 52 minutes.
Yep.
And let's face it, if this album has a flaw, it's that it's a little bit too long.
Yeah.
It's just a hair unjustifiably long. Towards the end, in our next, at the end of the 2000s podcast, I'm going to end this huge monolithic thing that we tried to do in talking through all of Metallica's discography by having Tom and me both rate our favorite albums, our favorite Metallica albums from A's down to what our least favorites are, right? Mm-hmm. And then we'll obviously want to hear everyone else's opinions on that. So I'm curious, how this one ranks, because it's not the perfect Metallica record that I think that they set out to make. Personally, I think that they already had made that with Master of Puppets.
Yeah.
And but I get why they made this record. I'm curious, Tom, what are your favorite tracks on this record?
My favorite tracks on this record, oh man, I would have to go Inner Sandman, as cliche as it is. Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam. I actually think one of the most underrated tracks on this album is Don't Tread on Me. I really like that one. It's just a hard-hitting, good, fun track.
Yeah, the harmonized vocal chorus is really nice on that song.
And then probably Nothing Else Matters and The God That Failed, I think, are both good ones.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I really like Sad But True, the second track on the album. I think that really highlights their new focus. And a trend that you're starting to see come out on this record is a focus on a very catchy chorus. And that is going to become a theme throughout really every record that comes out after after Black Album in 1991 is a bigger emphasis on the chorus, where that hasn't been that huge of a deal up until now. Like, it was always there, but I think with the advent of Hetfield being able to sing and pull off a catchy hook and really have it like sung well and performed well, I think that they're flocking towards this idea of a really catchy chorus to add to that simplification, to add the punch of the song. So much so that in later albums, I think they take it too far. Here, I think they do it just right. So Sad But True, very nice chorus, great guitar riffs, nice solo.
I'm your dream, my industry. I'm your eyes while you're away. I'm your pain while you repay. You know it's sad but true.
Wherever I May Roam is definitely one of my favorite songs. Nothing Else Matters and The God That Failed. Those are the clear highlights on this record. Now, I wouldn't say that the other tracks are bad.
No.
I actually think they're all very good. And I would agree with you. I think two of the weaker tracks on the album are the last two. So I actually really like your proposal.
Mm-hmm. You should try it sometime like that, because I did, and it actually worked even better than I thought it would.
Yeah, well, I think we should type up some sort of like proposal and send it to Bob Rock.
Hey, you know this album that sold millions? Just try it again.
I'd take my name off the petition if you would consider this.
God. Yeah, because I'm sure he takes that real personally. But this album, moving forward now from 1991, we have to acknowledge this album helped shift the mainstream of popular music, along with several other albums in 1991, and not just grunge. There were other things that were coming out in 1991. You have Red Hot Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar Sex Magic was a huge, unexpected success. Metallica had actually been a lot bigger. They were gaining considerable momentum with every album leading up to this. So they were in a position to make a strong change, to make an impact on the music industry. And they did that. And I don't think they necessarily did it intentionally. It's easy to see this in hindsight and think, oh, well, they went for shorter radio singles. But really, I think that's more of an output. It's more they wanted to write shorter songs. They wanted to write differently. And hey, it ended up working with what was popular at the time. I think it was very fortuitous that people were getting into heavier music. But, Jake, you mentioned this having more of a classic rock vibe. And whereas in the early 90s, we started to see the death of hair metal, bands like Poison and Rat and Whitesnake in favor of bands like Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, who weren't all that dissimilar from some of the hair metal, but it was an evolutionary step. And I think that Metallica, this album, not just in album artwork, it bears a lot of similarities to AC/DC's Back in Black, and that classic rock tie-in.
Right.
And it kind of marked a rebirth of hard rock and real, actual metal being palatable for a radio audience. And as we move through the 90s now, it's kind of interesting to see what happens with their next album, because the timeline that grunge went through, really coming to its popular peak in around 1991, 1992, grunge started to die out a little bit, and different kinds of offshoots of rock took over around 1994, 1995. We had more alternative rock. We also had post-grunge starting to become big in around 1995. And then 1996, we have Load come out. So we're in 1996. People have waited 5 years for a new Metallica album. This is the longest they'd ever waited.
That's an
albums.
incredibly long time between records.
Yeah.
For Metallica.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when this band has hit their peak from a sales perspective, and quite frankly, opened up the doors to a whole generation of new fans.
Yeah.
In the 90s. And as more and more of these Metallica singles from Black Album got more airplay, I mean, this band just grew exponentially.
Yeah.
And so 5 years passes, and then they go back in the studio with their producer, Bob Rock.
Right, and Metallica was thinking they wouldn't even work with Bob Rock again because, they just had a lot of friction, and then they decided to anyway.
Which in part, I really understand, because I think that Black Album is the best produced Metallica album there is.
It sounds
pristine.
Yeah.
It sounds really perfectly produced. So I understand why they would bring him back, even if it was such a tough process to go through. It's so frustrating for them.
Well, and also, despite the bad blood that happened in the studio, obviously it was a good combination because they sold millions. That's how are you going to say no to that if you can pull that off again, right?
Right.
But they're in a very powerful position, as they say in Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. They were going to pull the mainstream audience with them wherever they went, and where they decided to go was Load.
So Load, and not to give any spoilers away, but 1997 they come out with Reload.
Yes.
One giant recording session, right?
Yes. They considered having it be a double album. I'm glad they didn't, because it would have been
a quadruple album,
like 2.5 hours long or something. Just ridiculous. Actually, longer than that. Shit, like 2 hours and 40 minutes.
So what are some of the stylistic changes you hear on Load?
So there's a move to even more superficial lyrics, I would go as far as to say. There's also, with the vocal performance, just much more drama and flair in James Hetfield's voice.
Yes.
But instrumentally, there's a notable shift towards Southern rock. Whereas we saw in their earlier days, these guys pull more from bands like, Misfits and Diamond Head and these new wave of British heavy metal and punk bands, they were also very influenced by Southern rock. While they're not from the South, they're from Ireland. Thin Lizzy still has that kind of classic rock, Southern rock vibe. Also Lynyrd Skynyrd. You start to hear some of those kinds of riffs find their way into the sound. So that's kind of interesting. And really what they have is to, I'll say this and it'll sound like a compliment, and to some degrees it is, but not necessarily saying that they did the best they could have with it. What they've made is they've made the most diverse and experimental Metallica album to date.
To date with Load.
Yes.
Yeah. But it came at an expense. And I think that, especially when you start examining the songwriting aspects of Load, you hear that, overall that the songwriting is just asininely simple. And particularly the song structuring. Metallica goes full on pop structure on several tracks of the 14 very long tracks on this record.
Yep.
Everything is simpler. The song structuring, Hammett solos less, Ulrich's drumming is simpler. Only Hetfield's vocal presentation got more complex in a completely overzealous and unnecessary way.
Yeah.
I feel like these songs were supposed to have this groove to them, that Southern rock vibe, but Metallica performs them in such a way that they're more like they would perform them as like technical metal, and the result is this very forced, stiff sounding presentation that really just lacks. It removes the authenticity that they were going for. And I think that, because Bob Rock's there, and I think Bob Rock, I'm going to continue to compliment this gentleman, because I think that he's a great producer. The production is probably the strongest feature on Load from a songwriting perspective, but it's also the least consequential. Everything here is so simplified. It's so watered down and diluted that these song lengths, even though that these song lengths are, kind of 4.5 minutes, a couple longer tracks, 8.5 in there. It closes with the Outlaw Torn at almost 10 minutes long. The songs in almost every case feel way too long. Even the shorter tracks feel long because they have simpler ideas and simple structures, and they don't have the authenticity to sell it.
So I have a hypothesis here, Jake.
Give it to me, Tom.
And this will explain a lot about me and about why you hate this album.
Whoa.
What?
I haven't said that I hate this record.
Okay. Should I not have spoiled that? No. Here's my hypothesis. I think that Load, and subsequently Reload to a degree, but we're sticking with Load for now, and this was the first one that came out. I think this was the birth of butt rock. I think this was the birth of new metal.
I hate me some butt rock.
But think about it. Because think about where Metallica was in 1991. Like I said, they were in such a powerful position, the mainstream was going to follow them with whatever they did. Load inevitably sold millions of copies because it was going to.
Because it was Metallica.
Right. They could have put out an album of James Hetfield yelling at a shirt, and it would have sold millions.
Next year, if Radiohead releases an album of Tom York making fart noises, I'm probably going to buy it.
People will buy it. That's what was going to happen. So they made Load. It was a huge commercial success. Critics hated it for the most part, but it was a huge commercial success, so people saw dollar signs in the sound, and then what did you have over the next 3 to 5 years? You had a slew of bands making radio-friendly hard rock new metal. That's like, I feel like, you can't
that lasted
say,
10 years, man.
Right. You can't say solely that it was Load. And of course, the post-grunge movement coming out around 1995 and really starting to birth itself then, I think played a big part of it too. But it all culminated. It all lined up time-wise perfectly to make that happen. So you kind of, in a way, have to blame Metallica for some of that, because they really lost their way in terms of how they were making music and where they were taking a mainstream audience. Because I think that they could have kept it a little bit more artistic, and people still would have bought it.
Sure.
And maybe we would have had different musical trends. But they were trendsetters in the 90s. That's just how it was.
Tracks that you like on this record, Tom?
Oh, man. So here's the thing. There aren't really any tracks that I absolutely love. There are bits and pieces of tracks that I find myself enjoying. I actually, as much as it's kind of a cheesy ballad, I like Hero of the Day. I like that track pretty well.
Starts off major key,
Yeah.
and then goes dark for a little bit. It's an okay
Yeah.
song. I like it.
These things return to me that still seem real. Now deservingly.
And then the second to last track, Ronnie. I like the guitar part. That guitar riff is really nice
Very
and sleazy.
southern rock song there.
Very much so.
My way, this bloody day, lost my way. All things washed away, but blood stained the sun today.
Honestly, from there, it's more just this album I can put on and I don't hate it. I still enjoy it decently, but nothing really grips me too much. I like some of the guitar riffs here and there. Like I said, 2x4 has kind of a cool groove to it. But that's about it.
I think my favorite song on this record is track 5, King Nothing.
Yeah.
Just because it's probably one of the most Metallica-esque songs so far on the record, or at least throughout this record.
All the things you take, and it all crashes down, and you break your crown, and you put your finger, but there's no one around.
And somewhat kind of congruent to the sound that they were putting out on the Black album, and it has some nice guitar work. The opening track, Ain't My Bitch, I actually think that's a decent song for what they're going for. It kind of opened up their new direction. Following it up, the early tracks on this record, 2x4, 2x4, Southern rock, a little bit more experimental with the chorus vocals, but track 3, The House That Jack Built, 6.5-minute song. The most cliche lyrics ever. This song is the birth of butt rock. And
We're not just narrowing it down to this album.
Man.
It's that song.
The House That Jack Built is my least favorite Metallica song.
Period.
Wow.
Wow.
It is so bad.
That's monumental.
It is the
That's
worst thing that they've ever done. I'd rather listen to Lulu at full volume in entirety than listen to this song one more time. I'm done. I'm done listening to this song ever again.
I love that.
I will never listen to this song again. If you play it for me, I will walk out of the room.
The higher you are, the farther you fall. The longer the walk, the farther you crawl. My body, my temple, this temple it tilts. Step into the house that Jack built.
Well, Jake, you know what they say? The higher you walk, the farther you.
Stop it. I can't say that a lot, and here's, I think, kind of my summation of Load. With the exception of track 3, The House That Jack Built, there's really not a lot of terrible songs on this record. But there's not a lot of great songs either.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to pick any tracks on this record because there's just not any that stand out. It's all this just middling ground of misperformed Southern rock and Southern rock influenced heavy rock. And I don't even think that you can call this record metal. I really don't. I actually think the Load and Reload sessions are so far away from what metal as it's known in 1996 actually is. It's not fair to call this metal just because it comes from Metallica. It's not. It's just simply not. This is hard rock with Southern rock influences. That's what it is. It gets a little heavy at times. There's metal moments on it, but I would not call this record a metal record. Now, this is just part 1 of the Load Reload sessions.
Yeah.
So why didn't they release this as a double album? They had all these songs left over. Why didn't they release that at the same time?
I don't know for sure. Maybe they just thought it would be a little bit too much, because it would have been. But they certainly split it up. But I think that to that point, it's interesting because to me, Reload actually has a very different vibe to it, I think. And this is something that I wasn't really conscious of when I was listening to these albums a lot when I was younger. But in preparation for this deep dive, listening to these back to back and really analyzing them, I feel like Reload is a much darker album. I think it's a lot more authentically heavy in a classical sense. Now, I agree with you that I still don't think it feels like metal. but it still just carries this darkness to it that Load doesn't really have. Load's kind of a lighter album, even in its moments where it's trying to be edgier. It tends to be a little bit more upbeat. The lyrics are a little more forgiving, whereas Reload just hits a little bit harder.
So they took, in the year between when Load was released and when Reload was released, keep in mind they had all these songs recorded at the time, but they hadn't finished producing them yet. And in that time, Tom, as you pointed out, post-grunge was really taking a foothold at least in the American rock music scene. And there's a noticeable difference in the production style between Load and Reload. Load was much more of that southern rock, and while you still hear some of those southern rock tinges on this record, it sounds more of a post-grunge sound. So it's almost as if they were starting to just fold that, as that genre was getting popular, they're just folding in those influences and saying, yeah, like this is us. We're doing this. We're popular by our record. And that's a little bit really cynical, because at this point I do think Metallica is just grasping at their popularity. They had changed their public image.
Oh yeah,
like
cut their hair,
wearing
the way nicer clothes.
Right, everything about their image was different than what it had been in the early years, and that alienated a lot of fans. But it also gave them a whole breadth of new fans that are coming onto this Metallica bandwagon, going, "Oh my God, this is the greatest band in the world," and they probably aren't even listening to the old stuff. And they're just listening to this new stuff, thinking that these new Metallica records are the best rock records in creation. And I think that's such an interesting dynamic. And I'm not gonna put down anybody for the music that they listen to. I just won't do it, because I just want people to listen to more music. And I think that Metallica willingly change their sound so that they could do something different for themselves, but also for their fan base. Other bands that I like have done that. Radiohead. I just think that what Radiohead did was, and I have to bring every deep dive, or it has to circle back to Radiohead at some point. Radiohead was able to execute it at a very high level and keep their albums at a masterful level. I don't think that Load and Reload come anywhere close to that.
No.
Many of the problems that we talked about on Load a few minutes ago are pervasive on Reload. The songs are just too unjustifiably long. There are parts of each song, sometimes the majority, that are really pretty good, but the parts that feel like filler really bring down the quality of the track. And so when you sum that over the course of the entire hour and 76 minutes, 76 hour and 16 minutes, that's a ridiculously long time. When you sum that, it's just too much average material to justify that length of a record. So this album becomes a taxing listen straight through. And I think in comparison to Load, Reload maybe edges slightly closer to more of a guitar-centric album. I like a lot of the guitar work I hear, especially on some of the tracks on the back half of the record. I personally feel that Kirk Hammett saves this record from being a heaping, stinking pile of shit. I really do. There are several tracks on here where I found it almost impossible to pick tracks that I liked on Load. There's several tracks on here on Reload that I like.
I agree
Carpe
with that.
Diem Baby, track 7, track 9, Where the Wild Things Are, track 10, Prince Charming, are all great songs when it comes to a guitar and total composition perspective of the sound that they're trying to put together. Pretty well executed. It's just that the low points on this record are more severe.
I would agree with that. There are some tracks on here that really don't do a lot for me, but
we actually haven't talked about this record very much.
No, we really haven't. And when I look at this track list, I feel like I like these tracks pretty significantly more than Load.
Overall, I think I like Reload more than Load.
I actually, same here. That's what I'm saying. So one of my favorite 90s Metallica tracks is track 2, The Memory Remains.
I thought for sure you were going to say Fuel.
Oh, really? I actually like Fuel. People give it crap. It's inspired numerous memes. But I like that track. The lyrics are corny as hell, but that riff is killer. Yeah. And I think they do a lot more cool, edgy lead stuff on here than they do on Load.
Very true.
Look at track 3, Devil's Dance, which centers around a really grooving bass line, something that we haven't heard a lot from them.
It's a bluesy metal song.
Yeah, and the guitar comes in and it's sleazy and it's got that edge that they were missing. you called out Where the Wild Things Are. That's a highlight for me.
Definitely.
It's one of their most experimental tracks. Another song that I gotta love and hate at the same time is track 11, Low Man's Lyric. This song is 7.5 minutes long, and first off, it doesn't need to be.
No.
But I really like this song. It has this kind of like folk tinge to it, and it has a lot of heart. I really like the changes and the progressions that it goes through, but man, James overdoes it on the vocals. It is way over the top.
Oh,
It is the musical equivalent of a Nicolas Cage performance in a movie. That's what it is.
To the alleyway, confess all to the rain. But I lie straight to the mirror when I'm broken to match my face.
I just picture a Nicolas Cage montage playing during that song.
I don't know what he was thinking.
I don't know.
I don't
man.
think he was thinking.
I don't think anyone else was there. I don't know. They were all momentarily dead or something.
Who signed off on his vocal performances?
I don't
It
know,
sounds terrible. When he sings, I want to claw my ears out. Like, the guy just shouldn't sing. I get that he took vocal lessons and on the Black Album
Yeah.
actually did some decent performances. But man, the guy just doesn't have a good singing voice. He has a good yelling voice. He has a good shrieking voice. He doesn't have a good singing voice. Quit trying to sing and not only sing, but you sing so well that you're like flamboyantly over the top like some professionally trained vocalist. You just sound like an asshole.
Yeah.
And it sounds like an asshole.
All right. Well, now we know how you feel about that.
You can cut the asshole part out.
I'm not gonna.
It's really bad though. Like I really, a lot of times, any track on this record where I hear James doing what he does on both Load and Reload, I get flabbergasted by the fact that they allowed that to happen and willingly released it into the wild.
You know what's also kind of disheartening is that not only is the commercial success perpetuating their need to keep going in this direction, but they won a Grammy for Better Than You, track 5 on this album, Best Metal Performance. What?
That doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And they continue. It's I mean, okay, the Grammys, they clearly, if they had any interest in actually getting out there and figuring out what was new and vital in music, then, I mean, I love Metallica, but every time Metallica puts out anything new, the Grammys are like, well, guess we'd better nominate them for something. Like every freaking album that it came out, like actually starting with And Justice for All, which was nominated for Best Metal Album, like the first year that was a thing at the Grammys, actually got beat out by Jethro Tull.
Oh,
In an interesting turn of fate, one of the biggest Grammys upsets of all time. But from then on, it's just like they just kept bringing Metallica in as the token metal band whenever they released something, whether it was good or not.
It's in their name.
True, but that doesn't mean all their music is. On Load, we had Mama Said, which was a country song.
That's true.
Which actually, it's not a bad song for what it is. It just doesn't really fit.
You know, to sum my thoughts on both Load and Reload, and while these are not my favorite Metallica albums by any stretch of the imagination, I do have to applaud these guys for willingly taking on an experiment and running with it. Now, in hindsight, while this could have been a double album, really, if you were to take the quality moments of both Load and Reload, I think that at most you would have like a long, like 50 to 60 minute record.
Yeah.
Combining, like throwing out all the junk and just taking the highlights. You'd have like a 60-minute record, and it probably wouldn't be compared to any other album.
It'd still be their worst album.
It would be,
but it would be better.
Yeah.
I mean, and arguably, I would say. So we're moving on from 1997. We're gonna go on to 1998, which saw the release of Garage Inc. Now, this is not really technically a studio album. This is a compilation of cover songs and B-sides. The B-sides are also cover songs, but it's a double disc effort here, and it's got the first 11 tracks are cover songs that they recorded specifically for Garage Inc. And then disc 2 is entirely comprised of old B-sides. It also includes the Garage Days Revisited EP that came out in 86 when Jason Newsted first joined the band. That kicks off disc 2. And then it has, Am I Evil and Blitzkrieg, which were B-sides to the Kill 'Em All recordings, which was actually included on some of the re-releases of Kill 'Em All. And then just a number of other covers that they'd recorded through the late 80s and 90s. So it's, I think it's actually, when it comes down to a B-sides and covers album, it's really a pretty good album. I really enjoy putting this on. It's, it's not one of my more favorite Metallica albums just because there's not the original material driving it. But some of these, some of these covers, I think they do a really good job on. They had a couple of pretty big radio hits with Whiskey in the Jar,
right.
As well as Turn the Page, the Bob Seger cover.
But your thoughts will soon be wandering the way they always do. When you're riding 16 hours, there's nothing much to do.
Both of which I think they do a really good job of. If nothing else, they certainly make each track they do their own.
Yeah, especially with Turn the Page. I mean, that's an iconic song at this point.
Yeah.
It's an iconic cover.
And another one that I want to call out from disc 1 is Tuesday's Gone, Lynyrd Skynyrd cover, which they actually do live in a radio studio with a bunch of guests. They have Les Claypool in there. They have John Popper from Blues Traveler. They have a number of people, and that's a pretty cool recording. I think it's a fun rendition, and once again highlights some of their Southern rock influence.
Tuesday's gone.
But then it's kind of a tease because you get to the back half and it's all these covers that they had done like back in the 80s, and you're like, man, I just miss this sound and I miss this James Hetfield vocal
they're
style.
They're just rubbing your face in
I
it
know,
at that point,
right?
aren't they?
Yeah, and they end with a bunch of Motorhead covers that are really hard hitting and good. I really like also a little bit earlier than that, Bread Fan. The tracks I mentioned from the Garage Days Revisited album, we didn't talk a lot about that when we were in the 80s when that was actually recorded, which actually I think I said it was 1986. That was actually 1987. But what I think is neat about those songs is Jason Newsted's bass sounds fantastic. And then the following year, they put out Injustice for All and cut Jason Newsted out of the mix. But his bass playing, they have some tracks on there that like Crash Course in Brain Surgery, which really highlights Jason Newsted's bass abilities, and it sounds great. So if you want some early Jason Newsted highlights, that's really where you ought to go. But overall, I don't really know if there's too much more to say about Garage Inc. It's just a good collection of B-sides and covers.
So in 1999, they came out with S&M.
Mm-hmm. Symphony and Metallica. Play with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra.
What's your take on this record, Tom?
So this one I'm a little bit mixed on. And overall, I like it pretty well. I got this for Christmas the year it came out. And I was super excited. And
you would have been 10.
I was. And I played the crap out of it. So I got to know this album really well. And coming back to it now, there's some things I really like about it and some things I don't. So starting off with The Ecstasy of Gold, which is the classic soundtrack song, actually. They open all their concerts with that. But then they go into Call of Cthulhu, which I think is really cool because it's an instrumental track, and it's a longer track of theirs, and they rock the hell out of it.
And it really works well with the orchestra with them.
Oh yeah, it does. Because I think I mentioned when we talked about Ride the Lightning in part 1 of this, that sounds like a classical song. It sounds like it has traits of that in the way that it's composed, so it just fits. Now, the rendition of Master of Puppets on here, I absolutely hate.
Yes, me too.
I hate it. And it's all James vocals. They're way too clean. I'll play a clip of it here.
Who would taste me will see.
it just doesn't fit anymore. Like he doesn't get that gruffness into his voice, and it just sounds operatic and really corny. It just doesn't fit. So the songs that I think work better on this album are the newer ones, because that's what James's voice was more suited for at the time. But when they try to do some of their earlier stuff from the 80s, it just doesn't work as well. But really, you look at the track list, and there's some stuff from Ride the Lightning, and there's some stuff from Master of Puppets, but they don't really do anything from Kill 'Em All. And I'm trying to fact check myself here, but I believe the only song they do from And Justice for All is one. So they do some stuff from Master of Puppets, and later on, like, Battery sounds a little bit better, but the songs that sound better are the stuff from their 90s,
well,
which
and it's because it's simpler.
Songs.
There's more space for that orchestral backing to come in and actually add impact to the songs. Any of the songs that they tried to play, their fast-paced guitar parts and complicated drum parts and bass parts, there's no room to put anything else. So why, like, I don't know why they thought that would work, but it clearly works in some cases and doesn't in their earlier stuff. So, and
there are two songs on here that I want to call out that are originals actually for this album, and that's No Leaf Clover and then Minus Human or hyphen human, little hyphen punctuation mark. And the second of those, Human, I'm not huge on, but No Leaf Clover is actually one of my favorite Metallica songs. Nice. Maybe not top 5 or even top 10, but up there, and especially of their 90s work. I think that song works really well because, it's an original. There's no better version to compare it to, like there is a lot of the songs on here. So that song I always come back to because also they wrote it to fit James's new vocal approach, and they wrote it to fit with the orchestra. So for that reason, I think it succeeds much better than a lot of the tracks around it. But in terms of a live rock album, I'll give them kudos for doing something different.
Right.
Because I'm not really into live albums very much. I'd rather just listen to studio albums. So if I'm going to listen to a live album, it better bring something to the table that I'm not going to be able to get elsewhere. And I think that in doing that and in experimenting, they succeeded here.
I totally agree with that, Tom. So I'm curious, what is your favorite Metallica 90s song?
Ooh.
And you can't say Enter Sandman because I know you were going to say that.
No, I wasn't going to. First, I'm quickly going in my mind through load and reload to see if there would be anything on there that I would actually pick for that.
Obviously, Ain't My Bitch.
I feel like it would have to come from Black Album. And to that point, I would probably say Nothing Else Matters. That's just such a powerful song. I think they really nailed it on that one.
You know what? I would agree with you on that. That or maybe Enter Sandman.
Yeah.
I'll be that guy.
You dick.
I'll be that guy. I set you up. I mean, it's just such a classic Metallica song. It's really the quintessential Metallica song. If you're going to start anybody on Metallica, you go with Enter Sandman. You just have to.
Yep.
Be curious out there. This kind of concludes our 90s dive into Metallica, a little bit over the time that we said we were going to be. But still, I think we did a good job, Tom.
Yeah.
And, with the couple bonus releases that they did at the tail end of the 90s, I think that covering those is still good to have kind of the whole 90s picture. What is your favorite song from the 90s that Metallica released? We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on all of the Metallica 90s albums, just to get the sense of, obviously, I have a feeling most of you out there probably like Black Album the best, as Tom and I do as well. But I'm curious if there's some load or reload mega fans out there, what your perspectives are as well. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, your Facebook messages, and emails. Your participation is what makes Velocities in Music possible, so as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.